It's a Monday, December 23rd edition of the Fenway Rundown podcast. I'm Chris Cotillo, back from a week-long vacation. Sean McAdam is here as he starts his vacation around the holidays, working on his first day off. But that is the type of guy, the type of employee, the type of Red Sox columnist we have at MassLive. Sean, very much appreciated that you're joining us, mostly because, after me not being available for the two pods you did last week, as soon as it was my responsibility, here you are. So thank you very much.
You're quite welcome, Chris. This is a newsy enough day that I figured you could use a little help because we all know that talking to yourself on podcasts is not a good idea.
No, it's not. And you can learn more in COM 2247 in BC in the fall or the Chris Cotillo Sports Writing Workshop. One thing we're going to plug in addition to that, of course, is the Fenway Rundown Insider Text program,
which you can join by texting the word join to the following number, 617-751-6257. Click on the link to subscribe, and that will give you a free 14-day access to breaking news, all the latest on the Red Sox beat, lineups during the year, and the ability to ask us questions. Then after the free 2-week trial, it will cost you the low price of $4.99. That's $4.99 monthly.
So, as you said, a newsy day, been a newsy few days. You had Andrew Bailey on the pod. I think that ran Thursday. And since then, the Red Sox have added two pitchers, which he did not tell you about in preview, which was interesting. Who would have thought? But today, the big news, obviously, is that Walker Buehler is a member of the Red Sox. Sean, I have given you crap, let's say, so I don't have to put the explicit tag on the show before for some of your free agent targets who immediately sign elsewhere, Austin Hedges being one. Walker Buehler is a guy that during the postseason you were texting and saying on the pod and writing about, hey, this is a guy they should really go get. This is a guy I'd really like to see them go get. And so I'm going to assume that you are in favor of this move.
Yeah, I think it's a smart move. I had heard last week that the Red Sox were reluctant to give out any straight one-year deals. That is what Buehler's camp had been insisting upon. They see this strictly as a pillow deal, and it's absolutely not a coincidence that the signing number is exactly the value of what would have been a qualifying offer. The Dodgers did not give him one, but he got that equivalent from the Red Sox to sort of rebuild the reputation and then, in theory, seek a multi-year deal after this. It allows the Red Sox to offer him that qualifying deal if he has a good year at the very least and protect themselves so they get a pick if he goes elsewhere after this year. But in the short term, an experienced guy who has seen a lot of the mound in the postseason, most recently, of course, to end the postseason with a powerful inning of relief against the Yankees in Game 5. Relief is not what he's going to do here. He's going to start, and it gives them some important depth to that rotation and kind of a leader, a guy who has, had 2 top 10 Cy Young finishes, has been a rookie of the year, and has succeeded on the big stage in LA.
Yeah, I think, this is a move that it's a big name, obviously, a guy that people know about. When I was looking into it for writing a column that just went up on the site, I was a little surprised at how much he's pitched in the postseason. I mean, if you remember the Dodgers rotation for the last 7-8 years, you can expect it, but 94 and 2/3 innings, that's a lot. I mean, a Red Sox staff otherwise. Giolito has 2 starts for the White Sox in 2020 and 2021. Houck had some relief innings in 2021, but of course Crawford and Bayo have never pitched in the postseason. Crochet, I don't think maybe he did as a rookie in 2020.
He did in that expanded format. But not very much, and it was in relief.
But no starts other than the 2 from
Right.
Giolito. And so that's something where, maybe if they do get there, and this is way down the line, 10 months down the line, you give Buehler the nod in Game 1 if he's pitching well over some of these other guys because, he's done that and can kind of settle down, whatever it is. You just kind of needed that guy, even a guy like Nick Pivetta. He pitched well, in 2021 for the Red Sox in that kind of hybrid closer role, but not this type of experience. That is important for a team trying to get over the hump. And you said this before, and I think a lot of people in baseball have too. There's no such thing as a bad 1 year deal. If this is a disaster, the Red Sox have the financial might, they have the financial room to pay for the 1 year at 21.05. It's not 40 million, it's not 30 million, not that we thought it would be that, but you talked a lot about on this pod, early in the offseason, that if the Red Sox, have the financial flexibility, if they do want to be that big market team with a big payroll, they have the ability to offer Tyler O'Neill the 21. They did with Nick Pivetta. He declined it. We'll get to that a little bit. But this is, I think, a good move, and I think the big takeaway was, the two rotation additions that they made are, pretty high upside, and there is a level of risk with both of them. Obviously, with Crochet, we talked about it. All indications are that he is going to be elite, and he's trending in the right direction in terms of upside, in terms of potential and all that. The knock being the lack of a track record. So no track record and on the upswing. Buehler is the exact inverse, the exact opposite to me. A huge track record, a long track record, but on the downswing after coming back from Tommy John, struggled a lot last year. A lot of hits. The whip was very high. Put it together toward the end of the postseason, which helped his value. We've seen that happen time and time again. But you're banking on Crochet to continue in the trajectory he's been on, and Buehler to reverse fortune. And on a 1 year deal, it's a risk that a big market team should be willing to take.
Right. And there is risk everywhere when you're talking about acquiring
Right.
established starting pitching.
I
The Red
just,
Sox have acquired
not to
Red Sox
interrupt.
have acquired three
Okay, go
starting
ahead.
pitchers in the offseason who have combined to have four Tommy John surgeries, right?
Right.
Sandoval currently recovering, Buehler having had two, and Crochet already having had one. So there's four procedures for three guys, one of them not yet completely recovered, in the person of Patrick Sandoval, who could conceivably be available late in the year. I tend to take a cynical eye toward that sort of timetable. If you're talking about 12 to 15 months, then the absolute earliest return is July for him. That's ambitious. You know that with an investment for 2026, they're not going to push that and bring him back too quickly. So whatever they get out of Sandoval is kind of a bonus. But you're hoping, obviously, that both Crochet and Buehler are big contributors this year at the front of that rotation.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Tommy John, we got some of this in the insider text. Like, God, they love signing guys who have had Tommy John. I don't know what the percentage is throughout baseball, but like every team has multiple guys who have multiple surgeries. It's just kind of like a rite of passage, unfortunately, for these guys.
Yeah,
You know,
I think it's close to about 1 in 4 pitchers
I think
on
it might be
active
even higher
major
than
league
that.
rosters have had it.
Yeah, where the Red Sox, Crawford had it in the minors. Giolito's had two. Whitlock's had, or, the Tommy John, the
The
internal brace.
equivalent, right?
Whitlock too. Like, there's a lot of guys. Everybody's had it, and it's not really a knock anymore. It doesn't really mean damaged goods. You get through the process. You're supposed to come out, on the other end of it. That's why I think you're looking at, Crochet came back, guns blazing, and has been incredible since Bueller seems to have had that adjustment period where, he missed 2 years. He was sluggish out of the gate. Maybe with a full offseason, healthy offseason, he will be better next year. The point I was making about risk, and there is risk everywhere, is that, to me, the two top guys on the free agent market, and Fried and Burns, one is with the Yankees, one's still out there, and one guy we've heard a lot about in trades, and Luis Castillo. Those to me are about as high floor as you could possibly imagine. I know there have been some injury concerns with Fried. I know people were a little concerned about the workload in the past for Burns, stuff ticking down. Castillo was a little bit down last year in Seattle, but those guys are like proven contributors, healthy, mega deal types for the first two. Castillo, a guy who's been really, really good. Like, that's really high floor, which is kind of, what the rotation has in the middle to me. And now you're adding the high upside, and there is some more risk on a guy like Crochet or a guy like Bueller for sure than if you went and paid up. But I have no problem with them looking at Bueller for 21 million and deciding that's a better bet than Burns for 240. I know we both were a fan of Burns as the ace. To me, once Crochet was in, I didn't see Burns or another top guy being likely. Who knows? Maybe things can change if they get creative, but it looks like to me a finished rotation mix, and in general, Sean, one that is pretty deep and will probably leave you covered in the case of injury, which we know is inevitable.
Yeah, I mean, again, I question Sandoval's availability. We'll see
Right.
in the
Not
second
even not
half.
even counting him. There's 9 guys.
Right, but if you count him for say August and September, you have seven major league starters. You've got let me go through them all: Crochet, Bueller, Hauk, Crawford, Bayo, Sandoval,
Giolito.
and Giolito. And that doesn't begin to count Criswell and who else we have in
Fitz, Priester,
right,
and then even Dobbins later on.
right. And who knows about some other guys that they're talking about using um, in the rotation, depending on health and everything else. There is always the possibility that Whitlock could go back and be utilized as a starter. I think they see he's probably better suited for relief, but there are some other options, and I think it's going to give them a lot of flexibility, either to go with a six-man rotation at times. They're probably going to be very careful with Bueller early, I would imagine. Maybe
And Giolito.
and Giolito, right? And even though Andrew Bailey told us on the pod that Crochet can hit the ground running and be treated as a complete healthy pitcher in 25, you do have to factor in that this guy pitched 146 innings, and presumably there's going to be a jump in workload for this year that they have to be mindful of. Doesn't mean that he needs 6 weeks off, but maybe they give him an extra day when they can. And maybe they shut him down for a bit around the All-Star break to let him recover. But they have the depth that they haven't had in a long time here in that rotation. And this is, I think, you're going to see more and more of it at the major league level for teams with designs on contending. It's not just 5 major league starters and some kids we feel good about at AAA. No, it's 6 or 7 deep with some additional options stashed in your minor league affiliates.
We've talked about the Dodgers before. They had 8 pitchers make 10 or more starts, including Bueller, obviously, last year, including.
And you could have put together a rotation of guys who were on the IL and
Right,
completely unavailable in the postseason. They had like 7 guys
right.
that were on the IL or recovering from surgery or undergoing surgery. Um, the fact that they were world champions is an amazing testament to the depth that they did have at the rotation, given all the guys, Gonsolin, May, Bueller, all the guys, uh,
Otani not pitching.
right? Otani being unavailable for a good chunk of the year. They had to be careful with guys coming in their first year and making sure that Yamamoto didn't get overworked in the transition. I mean, that was a lot of work to balance all of that. And as I said, they had guys on the IL out of uniform that would have put together a pretty good rotation in October and won without all of them.
And you don't even have to look that far to see what rotation depth means. Like, you can just look back to the Red Sox at the beginning of last year. How many times in the lead up to spring training in January and February did we write about 7 guys for 5 spots, 7 guys for 5 spots, maybe 8 guys for 5 spots? And then Giolito blows out. Okay. And now Houck's in the rotation. And then in April, Nick Pivetta lasted 2 starts, a long IL stint. Brian Bayo lasted 2 or 3 starts, a short IL stint, but the point stands. And then Garrett Whitlock lasted 3, 4 starts and is lost for the year. And to the point where, the Red Sox entered last year, and you probably felt pretty good about the depth with, all the guys they had, Bayo, Crawford, Houck that we talk about, Giolito, Whitlock, Pavetta in the mix, Winkowski even, and you probably felt okay about that. Cooper Criswell made 18 starts for this team. They had to
Yeah,
go out and get
they
James Paxton
felt
at the
compelled to
deadline.
add Chase Anderson in the final
Right.
weeks of spring training.
And that's even before you get to July and you get to James Paxton. And then, it's just the fact of life. Guys are going to get hurt. They have a lot of guys with injury history. They have guys coming off massive workloads last year. In the case of Houck and Crawford, no one's rooting for injuries. No one is predicting who it's going to be or when it's going to be, but it's going to happen. There's going to be probably a significant one. There's going to be guys that miss multiple months. We've just seen this over and over and over again. And again, last year we did. Giolito was going to be your high floor, give you a lot of innings guy, didn't register a pitch. This year he comes in with potential restrictions. We see the same with, as we talked about, some of these other guys coming back too. And so, we talked about in the wake of the Crochet trade, I said I'd be comfortable if they entered the year with this rotation. Now that, of course, becomes even more, accurate. I don't think there's any chance they go out and get Corbin Burns. I don't think there's any real chance they go out and get Luis Castillo unless they try to get creative and, maybe send Crawford out in that type of deal. Um, to me, and I know you like Cutter Crawford too. Everybody's penciling him into the to bullpen mix. I think that's a little premature. He's a guy that's proven he can, most of the time be a pretty good starter. So we'll see how it shakes out in spring training. But like you've said, the six main guys that enter the year, the three depth options by the end of the year, maybe Dobbins and Sandoval are in there. Whitlock and Michael Fulmer could get stretched out. I mean, there is, I think a lot of potential here. And the rotation, for as many questions as there were, and as much as it faded down the stretch, still I think overperformed expectations. And you're adding, the number one, the guy who, is probably the most accomplished pitcher on the staff now, and Buehler to that mix too.
Yeah, I mean, and I think another point which we sort of touched on was that the guys in reserve at AAA at least have had some measure of success at the big league level. Now, Priester pitched about 4 months for Pittsburgh, got hit around, needed to make some adjustments, but it's not like he's going to step up and make his major league debut. Fitz had a handful of starts in which he was very good in September. And you've also got Criswell, who was a nice swing guy last year. So beyond those 7 starters that they could have by midseason are 3 more. I mean, you probably have to get that group up to about a dozen, and maybe, that's somebody else. Maybe it's Dobbins. Maybe it's
Fulmer.
somebody that takes a big step forward. It won't be Perales this year as he's recovering from Tommy John, but maybe someone emerges from that AA or AAA group to be a depth guy. But they've accumulated some real inventory to protect themselves at the very least.
I wrote about a tidy piece of business being, giving Nick Pivetta the qualifying offer, having him decline it, basically giving the exact same deal to Walker Buehler. I think you and I would agree. Maybe while the floor is a little higher on Pivetta, you'd rather have Buehler in your rotation for that price than Nick Pivetta. Almost no shot Nick Pivetta comes back now. But to kind of, maneuver all those moving parts, you're going to get a pick if Pivetta goes elsewhere. You don't have to give up a pick for Buehler. You can do that, and you get a pick for him in a year if he walks. It's, give Craig Breslow his flowers for playing a little bit of chess here.
Yeah, they've manipulated the pitching market pretty well, I think. They held on to the guys that you would consider their top 3 prospects in getting Crochet. Teal is a significant piece to give up, but you knew you had to do some of that to get a pitcher of Crochet's value, given the number of teams interested. And I think they could use another swing and miss arm at the back end of the bullpen. I think a Tanner Scott would be a huge signing. Even a Jeff Hoffman would be an excellent addition to that bullpen. But even if they don't add there, if they add Teoscar Hernandez to what they've done to Chapman, to Buehler, to Crochet, I think this is a very good win. And look, we have no evidence that that's close to happening, but the fact that the Dodgers seem to be balking at making that kind of commitment, this is a time where the Red Sox need to say, okay, 3 years, $75 million, sign here. Because I think that would win Teoscar Hernandez. It would give them the righty bat they need to hit cleanup in that lineup, or third or fourth or fifth, wherever they want to have them, to balance out all the lefties. Is it an overpay? Are you going to regret paying that money to Teoscar Hernandez in year 3? Probably. But again, use the flex, use the muscle that they have financially, where they haven't spent a ton of money. They spent $30 million on 2 starters. Crochet is going to cost them money to extend, but that isn't necessarily going to impact this year. So that's the one that they can, I think, be a little aggressive on. If they went out and got Hernandez to add to what they've done, I think they're a playoff caliber team.
And it's funny because it didn't come in the way of, if they do that, mega deal, mega deal, mega deal, let's spend a ton of money, when they're willing to spend so much on Soto. They're willing to offer Fried $200 million. And for some reason, we've talked a lot about be the Red Sox again, spend like the Red Sox. They haven't, really done that. This is the biggest free agent AAV deal they've obviously given out. Sandoval for 10 million ish a year on the AAV, Chapman for 10.75. There is still room for that, type of addition, whether it be Hernandez, Bregman, obviously still out there. I think, we think of that as less of a clean fit in general. Um, but I tend to agree with you. I think that's where they go next. We saw the bat market start to move the other day. A lot of moves on Saturday and Sunday around first baseman. Christian Walker goes to Houston. Josh Naylor goes to Arizona. Carlos Santana back to Cleveland for like the 40th time. Goldschmidt goes to the Yankees. We saw some of those veteran bats starting to go. Maybe Teoscar Hernandez is next. But at this point, it's been pitching, pitching, pitching for the Red Sox. And I agree with you. The bullpen could be an area where they could look next. Let's get into Sandoval, not Pablo. This is Patrick. Definitely not the name value of a Crochet or a Buehler, and a guy who will be unavailable for the first few months, if not all of 2025, as you mentioned. But a guy who, is, I think, looking at the numbers, I would say that I was not really aware of what he had done in Anaheim at different points during his career. Never an all-star, but just 2 years ago, 27 starts, 148 and two-thirds innings, a 2.91 ERA, a 3.09 FIP. A guy who, has been pretty good throughout his career. Not as a number one necessarily, but maybe as a, 2.5, 3. Last year was not a great year. 16 starts before the Tommy John, a 5.08 ERA. The Red Sox have tried this time and time again. I think like fans are sick of the delayed, contributor move because this got a lot of hate the other day. James Paxton, they paid him a year to rehab. He didn't pitch in year one, came back, was okay. In year two, they should have traded him at the deadline in 2023. Liam Hendricks, it was a lot of talk and a lot of hype about him coming back. That deal was always about next year. We'll see what happens. And now Sandoval, kind of the third one of these deals they've handed out. We've seen this time and time again. The Red Sox have done it. Other teams have done it. I think one of the more famous ones, Evaldi, when the Rays signed him, they got him at a reduced rate, paid him to rehab. So these types of deals are done all around baseball. I don't think that they indicate small market. I think they indicate kind of smart business. If Patrick Sandoval was a free agent at 27 and he was healthy, you wouldn't be able to get him for 2 years, 19.25 or whatever it was, 18.25. And I think he'd be, a bargain at 12.75 next year. Again, 9 on the AAV for the CBT. All acronyms here. But I just like it's tough to hate on that type of move if you just think about it as you're signing him now for 2026.
Yeah,
They're not banking
it's a
on
move with
anything. He's a guy that could help. Maybe if you get into the postseason, he comes back as a bullpen arm. Like I just think fans are exhausted by that type of move because Paxton was underwhelming and because Hendricks didn't pitch this year.
Yeah, I think the difference you have to understand is that Paxton was in his mid to late 30s and Sandoval's in his coming into his late 20s.
Right.
So presumably, once he's healthy from this, less of a risk. There were some other things that fell apart for Paxton and minimized his impact here. But I do like the Sandoval deal. I think you have him profiled a little higher up in the lineup than I do. I would say he's more like a 3.5, 4. But there's value to those guys, especially when you're paying him less than $10 million over the course of that second year. That provides some additional depth. And let's not forget that this organization has been bereft of lefty starters. That was one of the things that attracted them to Crochet, to get a potentially elite front of the rotation guy who's also left-handed. So is Sandoval. And when you look at what they have in their system, there isn't another lefty on the horizon. So having him penciled in for 26 and whatever you get out of him in 25 provides a little more balance to that rotation, which is something that can't be ignored.
Right. And so that's a move that, Patrick Sandoval will give a ton of injury updates. We'll have a ton on that throughout the year. That seems like
And you know what, Chris, around the trade deadline, get ready for, when Sandoval comes back, it'll be like making a trade without giving up anything.
That's true, which is always the case. There are a few other things I want to touch on from the week that was. We'll just briefly mention some minor moves. They signed Austin Adams yesterday as bullpen depth minor league deal. No such thing as a bad minor league deal. The Cam Boozer trade, obviously expendable because they have now Wilson and
Wilson and
Chapman
Chapman.
ahead of him as lefties. Needed a 40-man move. There's a few different things, obviously, that happened. You heard from Bailey. You had a really good two columns over the weekend, Friday, talking to Marcelo Meyer and Roman Anthony about Kyle Teal being traded, and then on Sunday about the changes coming to the NESN booth. For those that missed it, what should they expect to see on NESN and here on WEEI in 2025?
Yeah, well, on NESN, more Lou Merloni, who is
Hmm.
really going to serve as the number one, the
As,
primary
as he should,
analyst.
and is very deserved.
Yes, yeah, I think both you and I have great respect for the work Lou has done as an analyst, both on radio and TV. And Nesson feels the same. They've made him now the number one guy. I think that could, the number of games we see could increase going forward after this year. But he'll do more than half the games. There'll be some Will Middlebrooks mixed in. Unclear what's going to happen with Kevin Youkilis, whose deal was up, and he sort of served that role as number one guy last year. Does he come back for a smaller workload or not at all? Still to be determined. But Dave O'Brien and Lou Merloni will be the primary team on NESN. On the radio side, Will Fleming gets a multi-year deal as the primary play-by-play guy. That was very deserving, particularly in the wake of Joe Castiglione's retirement. So Will is going to do the vast majority of games as the lead play-by-play guy. And I think they're still trying to figure out at EEI how that fits together. Lou will do some radio, though smaller, obviously, because of his TV commitments. There could be a significant number of games from Will Middlebrooks, who's going to do a lot of studio stuff at home and then be available and in the ballpark to be able to do color with Will on radio. Could be some guys in and out. Could see Mike Monaco on the radio a little bit. Could see some other younger play-by-play guys that they're, stocking the bench for at EEI. But big takeaways is that Will Fleming is the number one guy on radio for a number of years, and Lou Merloni is now the primary and chief color analyst on TV with Dave O'Brien.
And two guys, recent Red Sox, who will probably mix in some way, shape, or form, maybe starting this year. But I know a lot of people have their eye on these two guys for radio work, for TV work. Rich Hill, as everybody knows about, friend of every program, and also Jackie Bradley Jr. is a guy that, if he's done playing, which he is either retiring or close, is a guy that could mix in on NESN, maybe pre and post, or the radio as well. So those are two guys to watch. I want to end here. There was a very, very, very meaningful and sad death in the baseball community over the weekend. It was Ricky Henderson. I think everybody was shocked to see that news. 65 years old. That news kind of dominated over the weekend. My story with him is that, as I've said before on the show, my first game ever was Derek Lowe's no-hitter in April of 2002. Ricky Henderson was a member of the Red Sox and led off that game with the bottom half of the first inning with a home run. So the first major league home run I ever saw in person was him, which is cool to say. One of the greats and a Hall of Famer. Obviously, you were covering that year where he was with the Red Sox. He was at the end. He was in his 40s, but I'm sure some entertainment came from that for you.
Yeah, no question, including some drama right before opening day where Ricky was under the impression that some incentives that were supposed to be part of his deal weren't there, and nearly balked at signing his deal when the Red Sox were, I believe, in Milwaukee to play a one-game barnstorming game before the start of the season. And Tony Maserati and I were recalling over the weekend our joint interview with Ricky and trying to get exactly where things stood with him. I would kill to have the audio from that interview at the time, because Tony and I still laugh about some of the way that Ricky answered the topic and approached the issue. He was an entertaining guy. Even at 41, he got on base. I think he had a 340 something on base percentage that year. He might have only hit 230, but he got walks. He stole bases. He was a decent outfielder still, even in his early 40s. Kept himself in tremendous shape, and it was fun to be able to say that we covered Ricky for 1 year, even if it was toward the end.
370 on base percentage in
Yeah, even
72
better.
games for the Red Sox. That was his second to last season, 30 games in Los Angeles the year after. And then, I remember this kind of from growing up, but he played independent ball and bouncing around for a few years because he didn't want to
Yeah.
give up, even as he
Yeah,
got to.
they had to rip the uniform off him. It's funny. I have a good friend in the business who is the longtime TV voice of the Miami Heat in the NBA, Eric Reed, who I worked with in radio in Providence in the 80s. And Eric wrote about this on Twitter or Facebook over the weekend. He was an intern and broadcaster with the Jersey City A's in the late 70s when Ricky was coming up in the Oakland organization, and tells great stories about his interactions with Ricky. So I had heard about the legend even before he arrived at the big leagues, and just a colorful guy. And that's one of the things I've written about, Chris, is that not only did we lose a lot of great players this year, led by Willie Mays, another Bay Area veteran, but when you think about the personalities that get lost, Willie Mays was not a huge personality, but a great player, arguably one of the top half dozen players in the history of the game. But Pete Rose, Louis Tiant, these guys all had larger than life personalities. And Ricky certainly qualifies for that. And that makes their passing even sadder. Not only were they great talents on the field, but they were compelling, interesting people, fun to talk to, showed a little bit of who they were to the media and by extension, the fans. And we don't get a lot of that today. Everything's kind of sanitized. Everyone's got the Nuke LaLoosh quotes all teed up and ready to go, full of cliches. Ricky never uttered a cliche in his life, I don't think.
Yeah, well, he will be missed by the baseball community, of course. This will be our only Fenway rundown this week. Want to wish everybody, well, you know what? I won't say that yet, because if they go out and sign somebody big late this week, it'll be my responsibility to come on here and talk all about it. Sean, you're off the hook. Want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. We'll be back next week for some regularly scheduled programming around New Year's, but not the regular two a week. And of course, we will keep you updated the whole time on the Fenway Rundown Insider Text.
Yep. And want to pass along my wishes for a Merry Christmas, a Happy Hanukkah, and a Happy New Year to all the listeners. You've made this podcast a great success this year. We look forward to continued growth in 2025. Tell your friends, rate, subscribe, do all those things. And don't forget to sign up for the Red Sox Insider Text program that Chris just referenced. All you have to do is text the word join to 617-751-6257. Get you all the breaking Red Sox news, like the signing this morning, like things as they happen. Ask us questions, supply questions for mailbag editions, all of it for free for 2 weeks, followed by an entirely reasonable ask of $4.99 per month on our part.